Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice 10-game slate for the NBA. It's actually a pretty reasonable slate. There's not as many injuries as we've been having, which is saying something. But there's a decent amount of injuries, but there's not nearly as many as there has been on these bigger slates. I really do like the slate, especially on DraftKings. FanDuel has really been rough the last week or so. It seems like everybody's a little bit priced higher than they are on DraftKings, and so it's not really ideal. I haven't been playing FanDuel as much, but I have been on a nice 8-day cash streak on DraftKings, so let's keep that going. Let's get into the injury report. Before I do that, though, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really helps the channel. So let's get into the games themselves. We have the Lakers with Davis out, Schroeder is probable, and LeBron is probable. For the Wizards, Abadija is questionable. Sorry for butchering your name. For the Rockets, Tate is doubtful, Gordon is doubtful, and Martin Jr. is questionable. For the Hawks, Capella is out and Hunter is questionable. For the Clippers, Wall is doubtful. For the Suns, Booker, Payne, and Cam Johnson are out. For the Mavs, Kemba Walker is questionable. Dorian Finney-Smith and Keebler are out. And then for the Hornets, Richards and Smith Jr. are questionable. For the Warriors, Curry and Wiggins are out, and Green is probable. And for the Kings, Sabonis is questionable. So not as many injuries that we have to worry about today, which is nice. It's been a long time since I felt like we had a really solid slate from that perspective. So let's go and get the players I do like today. We're going to start with Cole Anthony against the Lakers. He's been playing pretty solid lately. He's been a little bit up and down. But this is a nice matchup against the Lakers. A lot of guys are playing well against the Lakers. The Lakers are not playing very good, and he has some nice upside at this price point. He's been in this price range for a little while, but his minutes are really set pretty good, somewhere between 22 and 30 most games. So I do think he's in a good spot here, and he's been playing really well. Then we're going to look at Tyrese Halliburton for Indiana. Now, he had a really bad game yesterday. But he's had a couple off games recently, but he seems to always come back the next game, especially in back-to-backs, and just dominate. And so I look for him to do that today against Atlanta, who's, it's going to be a high-scoring game. So I expect him to play well. The Pelicans just smashed the Pacers yesterday from start to finish. And I look for the Pacers to bounce back in this one, especially Halliburton, who does pretty well in these types of games. Then Shai Alexander. My goodness, this guy has been playing absolutely incredible lately. His price point obviously has popped up to $10,000, but he's very viable on the slate with the nice matchup against the Spurs, who haven't been able to stop anybody. And I do really like him as a good option here on the slate. Not only that, but they're at home, which is where he does even a little bit better. And he's just been playing really solid. He's almost, he's had some huge games lately. He gets all the shots that he wants. He's the best player on their team by a large margin, and he's just playing like it as well. So if his team is going to, keep getting some wins, he has to keep playing like this. They've had a lot of close games that they've lost, but they've also been winning some games, and so hopefully he can continue his onslaught that he's been capitalizing this season. They don't have too many injuries right now, so it also gives them an advantage. Then we'll look at LaMelo Ball, who just seems to get better every single game since he's been back. He's been over 50 fantasy points for the last 4 games, and his price point actually came down from the last game, which was yesterday against Portland. Obviously, it's against Golden State, and typically that would be a, situation where you would want to avoid maybe. But, Golden State is beat up, and he's playing extremely well. He and Shai Alexander are really similar in their, when it comes to their fantasy point output today, and their prices are also in the same range. And then Chris Paul for the Phoenix Suns. With Booker out, he's been taking more aspect of offense, and this is a good. Obviously, the last game against Memphis, it was kind of a blowout so he didn't play as many minutes. I expect him to have a better game this time around, though. Even though John Morant, him are definitely play at a different style of basketball, I really do think Chris Paul will have a better game than he did last time out. And then Alec Pokusevski for Oklahoma City. He is starting with some of the injuries to the Thunder in the in the front court. So I do think he is a good option here with other guys out. And as long as he starts, he's viable on the slate. And his price point is actually pretty reasonable for what his potential is in this game. Same can be said for Soccer for the Spurs. Now, he is very dependent that he starts. So do make sure he does start. but this is a good matchup for him, and I do think he's viable on the slate. Then we'll look at PJ Washington for the Hornets. If Nick Richards ends up being out, I actually think he'll get a few more of those center minutes, and that could pay off for him. He's been very streaky this season. He can have massive 50 fantasy point games and then have games where he scores 20 fantasy points or less. So he is a little bit risky from that perspective. But with the situation on that team, he has some upside in this matchup. And then Jabari Smith Jr., I actually used him yesterday and he helped me cash. He had a really solid game. He's been pretty good lately, and he seems like he's gaining some consistency, which is nice. And this is a decent but tough matchup against Boston. But I think he has some upside here as a result of the situation. And then Miles Turner. Now, what a bizarro season this guy's had. He started the season out great. He's been absolutely terrible the last like 5 games where he just hasn't been able to score a ton of fantasy points. But his price keeps dropping, and his minutes are kind of in flux. But I think he has some upside in this matchup where he could probably do better. I do expect Indiana to do a lot better in this game, and I expect him to play better than he has been. He definitely has big-time upside. He's shown that throughout the season. He's had some massive games, but he is streaky, much like PJ Washington, so do keep that in mind. But his team is projected to score a lot of points, and I think he'll bounce back here and have a good game. And then I'm also going to talk about a couple other centers. Sengun for Rockets. He's just been playing really well lately. He's been pretty consistent recently. He had a couple off games before, for a 5 or 6 game stretch before, but he's back on track and he's playing well and he's playing a lot of minutes, and that's what I like to see here. Obviously a tough matchup, but he has some upside as a result of his price point. And then Okongwu for the Hawks. Looks like he'll be back starting today with Capella out. And if he does start, then he's going to be a viable option on the slate at this price point. He's not super ideal, but he's decent. And then, of course, I've got to talk about Nikola Jokic here for the Nuggets. He is absolutely just destroying the NBA right now. The Nuggets are on a nice streak of wins. I think they've only lost one in the last like 7 or 8 games. And they've had some against, I think that was against Dallas. So he's had some really good games. He's had, I think, 3 triple doubles in the last 4 games, and almost had 4. And then he's had a couple before that recently as well. I mean, even at this $11,400 price point, he's been paying off almost literally every day, which is absolutely insane recently. And as long as he continues this onslaught, he's somebody I'm going to take a look at regardless of the situation. And obviously against the Kings, which are a pretty fast-paced team, he's going to have some really good upside. They also shoot a lot of jump shots, so I do like that situation for rebounds. And I think he's going to be able to dominate here. Now, there is a risk of a blowout in this situation, so do keep that in mind. But I do think he's viable on this particular slate. I'm going to go real quick through the teams that I do, who I choose to win each game here real quick. So I've got the Magic over the Lakers. I have the 76ers over the Wizards. I have Boston over Houston. I have Toronto over the Clippers. I have Atlanta over the Pacers. I have the Spurs over the Thunder. I have the Phoenix Suns over Memphis. I have Dallas over the Knicks. I have Charlotte over the Warriors. Charlotte over the Warriors. And then I have Denver over the Kings. So overall, I think it's a really solid slate from that perspective. So let's get into the plays on FanDuel. Now, like I said, it's a start. I'm not a big fan of FanDuel today. I felt like that all the prices on all the players are higher than they are on DraftKings. Obviously, the scoring differentials are a little bit different, but honestly, a lot of guys don't look as good on FanDuel as they do on DraftKings today. Not just because of price, but because of the scoring, the differences in scoring and stuff. So let's go ahead and get into the point guards. So we're going to start with LaMelo Ball. He's just been really consistent so far since he's been playing, and I really like how he's played. Obviously, his price point is pretty decent over here as well. He's one of the only guys where, even though his price point is higher on FanDuel than DraftKings, he does look decent enough here. Sorry, he is one of the only guys where his price point is below his price on DraftKings. Then we'll look at Chris Paul. Now, he's not super ideal because of the matchup, but he's been playing well with Booker out. He had one bad game against Memphis because of the blowout situation, but I expect him to bounce back and have a big game here. Then we'll look at James Harden, who's a little bit underpriced here on FanDuel for his potential. He's been having some really big games the last few. He seems pretty motivated right now. And as long as he's motivated in a nice plus matchup, he's somebody you have to consider. Then we'll look at Tyrese Halliburton for the Indiana Pacers. Obviously, he had a bad game yesterday, but he's had some bad games this season, and he usually bounces back with a 45 fantasy point or better game afterwards. And so I look for that to continue here in this matchup against Atlanta. And then we're going to look at Jaylen Brown. Now, Jaylen Brown has played really solid this season. He's had some ups and downs, but overall he's been good. And it seems like about every other game he has a really big game, and this would be that situation for him to have a big game. So I like that potential in this game against Houston, who is a pretty fast team, but also doesn't give you a lot of defensive situations. Then Paulo Banchero here. He has been up and down this season, and his ceiling is not quite as high as I would like for his price point, but he is viable on the slate. He's played well, and he's got a nice plus matchup against the Lakers, who don't have Anthony Davis right now. Then we're going to look at Porzingis, who's been playing really well so far for Washington. He just took off. He had a couple off games, and then he got hurt, and then he played well, and then he got hurt, or at least didn't play 2 games, and then he came back and played 34 minutes against Sacramento and kind of got back into the swing of it. He should have more opportunity for points in this game, and I like him in this matchup to have a big game. His price is pretty reasonable for his potential here. And then at center, last but not least, Okongwu for Atlanta. He just looks like he's in a pretty good spot here with the situation and with injuries and stuff for the Hawks. He's going to have plenty of minutes in this game, and I think he has double-double potential as a result, especially in a plus matchup here against Indiana, who hasn't really stopped anybody this season. And obviously, Jokic, obviously, his price point is higher here on DraftKings, or on FanDuel than DraftKings, and he actually doesn't get as many fancy points on FanDuel as he does on DraftKings typically, but he's still well within the reasonable potential here. So if you find some nice value plays, which honestly there aren't many today, since there's not a ton of injuries, you could use them, but otherwise, I would probably go with Okongwu today. So with that said, guys, that's what I have for DraftKings and FanDuel today. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.